the 10K Collective podcast, place for 6, 7, 8 figure Amazon sellers and e-commerce sellers. Today we're talking to Tom Meek from Payoneer, and we're talking about that old chestnut, which is really, yes, you could expand internationally. If so, is it worth it? And if so, what do you have to do? What hoops do you need to jump through to get there? So, Tom, warm welcome to the show, first of all. Thanks for coming on live with us. Always fun.
Thanks very much for having me. Good to be here. And yeah, hi everyone.
Yeah, and I've got to say you're the guest with the most patience in the world, because we've had like 3 goes at scheduling this, and then Zoom decided to let us down for 20 minutes. So here we are fighting through the tech issues. So there's always tech issues, folks. If you're selling online or broadcasting on any other online activity, just jump through them is what I would say, and stay patient with each other. So we're going to record this as a podcast in a second, Tom, but any anybody who's listening, please feel free to pop any comments in, or if you're watching live, I should say, or if you're watching in the replay, which a lot of people do pop in any comments in whichever channel you're in, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., and we'll feed those back to Tom so he can give us some expert insight. But with that said, Tom, are you ready to record the interview itself, the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Let's do this thing. Right then. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8 figure Amazon private label and custom product sellers. It's got a very, very specific niche we're calling out there. Today we are talking to Tom Meek from Payoneer. Payoneer is one of the places to go for any international currency exchanges, and they have a massive network these days of expert partners as well. So they're far more than just a payments provider. I think they're a real sort of hub of international services. So Tom, first of all, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. And yeah, good to be here and looking forward to today's discussion. That was a mouthful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like myself, you're based in the UK. So, I guess in the UK we have to think about international expansion a little bit earlier than our friends in America would, because the markets in the UK itself are quite small if we insist on staying only there. So, a lot of people listening will be in the UK and wanting to expand to America or possibly Europe. Some of our listeners will be in North America wanting to kind of go the opposite way around. So, we're going to deal with a couple of questions, which is international expansion. Is it worth it? And if it is, what do we need to do? That's going to be most of the focus on it. So first question for you, Tom, then, is really, is it worth bothering with in general?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, it's a big question. I think that the obvious answer there is that it's 100% yes. E-commerce is very clearly growing year on year, and of course through COVID, there's been a huge spike in demand. I think that there's a lot of different areas that need to be focused on as an e-commerce seller, which really is going to determine at what point you expand, how you expand. Do you go in slowly, or do you go jump in with 2 feet, which is sort of generally what we would recommend. But yeah, I'd say the opportunity is still there. The amount of users is always increasing, and obviously the revenue is increasing off the back of that. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's very good points. And I guess the other thing I would add to that is, um, I've known quite a few people who, during the sort of crazy times of COVID, and we're entering more interesting times, aren't we, with various things, supply chain shortages, and now hyperinflation. Well, not hyperinflation yet, but high inflation in the US and the UK to some extent. It is a bit of a hedge against something strange happening in one marketplace, which really hits your sales. So, for example, somebody in the US in mid 2020 that I know, Kevin Sanderson, who we discussed it with then, was selling most of his sales in North America, in America particularly, and a bit in Canada, and then that almost got shut down, and his European sales really saved the bacon of his company. So that's without even talking about exchange rate fluctuations or geopolitics. So if you were selling in the USA in 2016 and suddenly your import tariffs shot up, but you were also selling into Europe where they stayed the same between China and Europe and China and UK. Those are a couple of examples, aren't they? So I would add to your cry to really consider it. So let's get into our checklist. Before we do that, we ought to hear a little bit about you. Tell us a bit more about you and your role at Payoneer as well.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as I said, my name's Tom Meek. I've been within the e-commerce space for coming up 5 years. I actually started my journey at an accounting and tax firm. So I was helping really thousands of e-commerce sellers to expand into the likes of the US, Australia, the UAE, Europe, UK, and many more as well. And that wasn't just from a tax perspective. That was also just a general expansion, advice, consultancy. So I've done that for many years, and assisted thousands of businesses of all sizes, from your original startups that are selling just in their home country to larger firms that are turning over millions a month on various channels. So that's where I started things. I'm now, of course, working for Payoneer. And as Michael mentioned, the Payoneer are a huge company that was incorporated in 2005. And the idea of Payoneer and concept is that we assist businesses with their expansion by really assisting in the payments piece. So any making and receiving of international payments, Payoneer acts as like a bank account for your business to be able to take that leap into those new markets.
Yeah, certainly something I've used, and they've got quite a few cool sort of features which you can talk about a bit later as well that help with that piece. But I think your background a bit more generally is helpful here, because what we're going to do is a bit of a sort of overview today of what you need to do if you're going to go expanding internationally. Then what's our checklist? So what's the first item then on our checklist, Tom?
Yeah, look, there's so many different things that we could talk about today. I think if we sort of hit the top ones, I think, of course, like we're presuming that most businesses listening today have already sourced their products. They've taken that step into selling in their home market, and this is then thinking about sort of taking that next step into to expansion into a new market. So I guess number one is really identifying where that's going to be. And I'm not placed and to be able to say which country or which marketplace that will be, but I think it's really important that sellers of all sizes, in all verticals, in all niches, will need to do their due diligence and to really understand where their products are going to be most sought after, and where the demand is, taking into fact the competition, the pricing, and all of the other aspects that come into that. So really getting to grips for where your products are going to sell well. So really digging deep into the country and to the marketplace. As we know, it's not just Amazon. I know Amazon's a really easy marketplace to really get your teeth into, especially at the start. And FBA makes it so easy to obviously then expand into new countries. But there are, of course, additional marketplaces outside of that, in some cases actually leading above Amazon, especially when we talk about Europe. There's also some really quickly growing marketplaces in the UK as well, which again, if you've done the hard work of getting your products into the country, why not think about further expanding your visibility online? So that's number one. Michael, I don't know if you had anything to chip in there.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. I mean, it's a very good point that particularly in certain European countries like Bol.com in the Netherlands or Cdiscount in France, I mean, Bol.com is way bigger than Amazon in the Netherlands. I think they don't seem to have got their teeth into Amazon, into Netherlands yet. And Cdiscounts, I think last time I looked, about half the size of Amazon. That relationship may have changed, but yeah, they can be quite significant size. But yeah, I suppose Amazon's mostly the biggest, so that's probably the easiest starting point. I would suggest that if you don't have expertise available easily for fulfillment, and we'll talk about that, but FBA is your wisest starting point. The other thing I would say, let me just give a few specific countries. If you're based in the UK, Germany is not the simple place it was to sell, but it is still somewhere you should consider. If you're based in the US, then UK and Germany both invite themselves. Now, for everybody, Japan is an interesting one because you can't really use the same tools like Jungle Scout or Helium 10, etc. They don't work as well in Japan as they do in other places. It's a complicated place. They have three alphabets, etc. It's a complicated business, but it's normally pretty neck and neck with the UK in terms of the size of the market. So that's another one that people tend to ignore because it's a bit tricky. And actually, your tricky is the same as everyone else is tricky. And if you can be bothered to solve the problems and your competition can't, I think you've got a bit more of a barrier to entry. So personally, I would suggest being willing to jump through those hoops. So talking of hoops, I guess one of the other things we've got to talk about is tax, right? So we've got VAT in European countries. I guess it's got to be somewhere up on the top of our list. How do we deal with that? How do we begin to get our heads around that?
Yeah, I suppose, as you say, once you've really mapped out what that path of expansion looks like in terms of, the geographical area that you're going to be expanding to, I suppose you've really got to dig into the checklist of those things, and tax being one of the most important. So obviously, I'm not working for a tax firm anymore. I'm working for sort of a fintech payments company. So in terms of the actual tax advice, I still recommend people going to sort of actually directly speaking to a tax provider. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously, when you look at various countries, let's take maybe like the UK and EU. It's always recommended that sellers have sort of VAT numbers in place prior to actually expanding, or actually having physical stock held there, because it is going to be a requirement of each country to have a VAT number actually in the country that you're going to have physical stock in. Now, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, there's been a whole load of changes in sort of the EU and UK. I'm sure it's probably been a bit of a whirlwind for those that are selling there already. But it's for the best. It is complicated. Any change is complicated at the start, but it is going to make everyone's lives easier as time goes on. And the main reason that is because when we talk about expanding your business from the US into, let's say, the EU or UK, if you're just selling on a marketplace, then Amazon, or the e-commerce marketplace that you're selling on, will be known as the deemed supplier, which basically means that they're going to be remitting that tax for you. As it happens, similar to the US system as well. But yeah, certainly on the checklist, you've really got to nail down onto the taxes. It doesn't mean that you don't need to register for VAT. You still very much need to do so, but the process of actual remitting the VAT is going to be much easier because it's done for you. And then things like import VAT, and really calculating what that import VAT percentage is based on the the VAT rate in the country that you're shipping to is another consideration, because you've got all sorts of things to bear in mind with reclaiming that import VAT if you're VAT registered, and obviously making sure that that whole part of the expansion is seamless.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, as you say, it is the sort of move towards the marketplaces being responsible for remitting sales tax in majority of, if not, I don't think quite all the states in the USA, has been a welcome development. And yeah, it's good to see a similar development with VAT in Europe, because VAT blows Americans' minds just as sales tax blows Europeans' minds, because it's almost a different culture, isn't it? If you go into a shop in the States and you buy something and then they add sales tax, that sort of feels very strange for a European, and vice versa. When I say European, including UK and Europe in that case. Yes, the whole question of which country you're shipping into and the VAT rate is a very interesting one that people play interesting games with, isn't it? So they ship into which other country they perceive as having a more lenient approach. Germany
I think,
famously being not too lenient there, for example.
yeah, absolutely. And just to chip in there, sorry, Michael, just to maybe provide a bit of context as to the general pathway that we see, and you mentioned it earlier, is that the UK, pre-Brexit was the gateway into Europe. And now everyone's had to sort of separate the markets, being sort of separate entities, if you like. So what we see most businesses doing is that we're seeing sort of shipments going into the UK, shipments going into the EU separately, because obviously then there's, you don't get double taxed on customs. So yeah, I would definitely say treat the territories differently, as separate entities, because it's going to be much easier for you as a business. And then when we look at Europe, well, if the UK isn't the place to ship to anymore, and pan EU FBA, which I'm sure a lot of people on here will be very familiar with, isn't actually facilitated via the UK anymore, which it's not, then you're going to need a separate shipment into Europe. Now, as you said, Michael, it's Germany tends to be the largest market up there with France. So a lot of businesses will automatically think, great, let's get our stock into Germany. And by all means, that can always be a really good route for expansion. But when we look at this customs procedures, it is much more tense. It takes a lot more time. It can be a bit more expensive to go through to Germany. So just to give you a bit of an idea as to what a lot of other businesses are doing, is actually going into the Netherlands, because there's some really strong advantages, like deferring your import VAT, being one of them. And it's much quicker and easier to get stock in through the Netherlands, and it's a really short journey up to the German fulfillment centres if we're talking about delivering to FBA. So hopefully that provides a bit more context around that.
Yeah, that's very helpful indeed. Yes, I would definitely say from the past year of the mastermind, so in 2021, experimented a great deal with the sort of EU UK barrier. And I would say mentally, you need to kind of treat the UK like it's suddenly moved 3,000 miles away from the EU in terms of how easy and quick and expensive it was to move stock between the two entities. Absolutely incredible. It was been taking sort of 2 months to move stock from one to the other or just get rejected. So it was a bit like trying to ship to some exotic country on the other side of the world with a terrible tax regime. It's gradually sorting itself out, but I would absolutely agree 1,000% that you need to have separate shipments to the UK or the EU, depending on which one you're trying to sell to. I can't stress that enough based on the stress I've experienced with my clients. And then the other one is yes, where you enter Europe is really critical because Europe's kind of a one thing if you're in the United States looking at it. But just like to be fair, the United States is not just one thing. You have different sales tax and different other regulations. There's Prop 65 in California. Goodness knows that's hard enough. So we are, I suppose, tending to talk about Americans shipping into Europe or starting to expand into Europe. We ought to adjust the sort of other way round in terms of tax. And again, not expecting you to be a tax specialist, but this is a sort of jumping off point, not an end point, I suppose, in terms of advice. What are your thoughts about somebody who's based, say, in the UK, who wants to start selling into the US? What's their kind of reverse? What's their pathway?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, it really depends on which marketplace you're selling on. I think let's say it's a Amazon FBA, and you're selling good volumes in the UK. Maybe you've expanded to Europe. Maybe your next step is the US. Again, a lot of things to consider. Really, the same aspects, I suppose, is making sure that the shipment arrives on whichever side of the states that you're looking to ship into, which FBA center, making sure that the states that you're actually going to be storing your products in, making sure that whether Amazon is going to be the facilitator of the sales tax, because again, Mike, you mentioned there's a few states that Amazon does not have the requirement currently to actually file and remit that tax. That problem, generally speaking, is becoming less and less. I think it's evident that the marketplace facilitator, as we call it, is kicking in, which basically means that Amazon, like it is in across the UK and Europe, is becoming the deemed supplier, which means that they're actually technically paying that sales tax on behalf of you as a seller. And really, there's not much more to it. I suppose any country that you look at, there's always going to be those fundamentals to look into. Yeah, I mean, obviously the States presents a huge opportunity in terms of market size, but of course on the negatives, it's highly saturated as well. So really doing your due diligence before you actually expand to understand whether your products are well received and what that could look like is extremely important.
Absolutely, yeah. I would just say on that front, people often see dollar signs when they see, my goodness, there's $1 million of sales going, based on a particular keyword, and so roughly you could say that niche is, $1 million a year market or month market or 10 million or whatever. But yes, agreed that a lot of the competition there is really harsh, so you need to be very, very careful that you can actually compete. And above all, I think don't go in underfunded if you go into the US. You're going to need deeper pockets than you would in the UK, in my experience. Having said that, you can make a product work that is super niche and extremely specific in the US, where the market just isn't big enough to support it in the UK or even Germany. So it can go two ways. So if in doubt, the niches are in the riches, as the Americans say. Which always makes me twitch a bit because that's not how you say the word niche, but it's true. Apart from the mispronunciation, and the other thing is, yeah, I would say the situation with sales tax from a very sort of amateur 60,000 foot view is sorting itself out. I wouldn't assume, therefore, that it is simple. And I think you do need to get good advice. But quite a few people seem not to agree on whether you should register for sales tax or not at all. If you're selling on Amazon, if you're selling on Shopify or something, your own channels, then it's a different thing. But if you're selling via marketplaces, what are you seeing? I'm not asking you to give tax advice, but what are you seeing your clients do in terms of registering for sales tax in the US? Are they all immediately registering in lots of different states, or are they just kind of holding off until they see which way things are going?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I'd definitely say that there is a mixture of people that do one or the other. I think some of the larger businesses are definitely wanting to, of course, be compliant from day one, and that is, of course, a requirement a tax perspective. But as you say, if it's just an e-commerce platform like Amazon, then the rules are different from selling on Shopify. So if that is the case, I would say that a lot of businesses will look at sort of where their maximum exposure is to start off with, which is something called physical nexus. So if you actually have physical stock stored in a state where Amazon doesn't, facilitate the sales tax, then it's going to be, recommended, of course, from a tax provider that you do register. But on the flip side, I see a lot of businesses not worrying, especially if they're just selling on Amazon.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that I'm not suggesting so much that people would be sort of slack about doing the right thing if that makes their business safer. All I can say is, and again, this is an anecdote, this is not tax advice. I'm not even remotely qualified to talk about sales tax at any technical level, but I have seen a couple of clients who've registered for sales tax everywhere they were supposed to, and then were chased around the planet wide by particularly California because it's a rich state, but it's also so it's got the resources to chase people, but it's also needs the money. Like a lot of the states in America are quite broke, partly because they have constitutions that mean they can't run a deficit and things like that. So, and again, look, I'm not a constitutional expert, but the point is that they have the resources, but also the need for the money to chase you around. So it's a little bit like giving your address to the bailiffs sometimes. So all I would say is, um, put it this way, it's a bit more of a nuanced decision than it looks like to start with. California has some weird rules like Proposition 65, or I think that's what it is, that has all kinds of crazy ramifications. Just go and Google it is what I would say, and go and make a nuanced judgment on that is all I would say, because California is not something you want to mess with. And weirdly enough, if you register for sales tax, then they start chasing you for 10 other things in some cases, and that's what I've seen. Exactly why that works that way, I don't know, but I've seen that it has. So there's always a few complications that can arise from these things that you don't expect. And the lesson from that I would take is just a simple one, which is don't just talk to sales tax experts, although you should. But I would say you need to talk to fellow sellers and get the sort of everyday lived experience because not always as pretty, is it, as the theory.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to the next thing. So we talked about tax, never fun but necessary. We talked about the opportunity, which is exciting. What are the other things that we need to have some next on our checklist to be ready to expand?
Yeah, of course. So, I haven't had a huge amount of exposure to shipping and logistics, but I think it's certainly that next thing to consider. I think to really understand, the size and weight of your items, and to understand, what the shipping impact is, what the time frame is, so you can start, getting an idea for what your run rate is, and making sure that that you are constantly in stock with Amazon. I know you don't want too much stock, but you don't want to run out at the same time. So that's certainly for me that the next piece is really understanding that path of getting from A to B, from let's say you're sourcing in China and you're shipping into Europe, and that is example. Then making sure that you know what that is, what the timeframes are, what the costs are. And then, aside from that, I think a lot of sellers have been open to inventory limits, which I always like to talk about, because it has had a large impact on the success of businesses last year, especially through the COVID-19 period, where Amazon was sort of restricting the amount of stock that sellers could actually hold in a warehouse, and that was across many countries, not just sort of your core US, UK, and EU. So because of that, I think it's a lesson in itself. And if you're looking to scale a successful brand, or successful business full stop in a new market, then you've got to really understand how much stock you can have there. And for me, my advice on a high level would be to look at using some sort of third party logistics center on the side of Amazon FBA. Not only because it can be cheaper, because we know Amazon's FBA fees are high, but also because it allows you to one, save cost, because the fees are lower for storage. Two, it allows you to then drip feed your stock into an Amazon warehouse, so you can then, let's say it's 1,000 units that you're allowed to ship into Germany. Well, you can then keep topping that stock up as and when you need to. And instead of ordering from China for that shipment and waiting X number of weeks, months for it to come, it's already in country, it's easily transferred, so it's much more reliable. and it won't affect your IPI score, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. And then, there's also the facilitation of off Amazon sales. And I know that, a lot of businesses are still using Amazon FBA and their warehousing solution to facilitate sales on other marketplaces. But the likes of global e-commerce experts and Habu, to name a few, have great warehousing facilities in Europe, which actually will facilitate that sort of prime promise outside of Amazon, but also facilitate sales off, let's say, eBay, Bowl we mentioned, and many other markets as well. So definitely for me, the 3PL aspect, the third party logistics is essential for a great expansion, providing that you are planning on selling quite high volumes.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I guess this is not really an international expansion issue, that the third party necessity so much as anywhere, including if you've been selling in the US on FBA for 5 years in a row or something, and suddenly in year 6 you have to think about this now. It's no different in other countries. So I guess that is a problem, in that you've got to find a new third party warehouse, but the basic structure's the same as all of us have had to deal with, right? And the same with inventory limits. It's really not surprising that Amazon should not allow its fulfillment centers, which it does not call warehouses. They're not designed for stacking up and storing stuff. They're expensive, high technology. It's taken them 4 iterations and 20 years to get them to the point they're at, right? So no wonder they don't want to just use them as a boring old warehouse for storing stuff in. So that makes sense. And as an overall system, you can see why they'd be forcing that. It is another cost point, and I guess we all have to just make our calculations based on having a 3PL. As you say, I think it's really important to not only give yourself the opportunity to expand internationally just on what Amazon, although that is the main focus of this podcast, and most people are selling, I think. But giving yourself the option of other sorry, marketplaces, which particularly in Europe, I think can be. I wouldn't say so much in the UK, but in continental Europe can really be quite big. So I certainly know a few people who found that extra pathway to be a real lifesaver. In terms of stock management, I just wanted to say that you're going to have some choices, aren't you? If you want to make sure you don't run out of stock, then you're going to need to be overstocked. Otherwise, you're going to run out of stock, which is bad. But on the other hand, you haven't held on to too much stock, so you haven't had to have massive working capital, right? So you pays your money and you takes your choice. I would suggest from experience that running out of stock is the biggest hit to profit in your business. But if you're going to stay in stock, you've got to have a lot of money tied up in stock, which means you've got to have loans or capital, right? So let's talk about the resources needed. I mean, do you guys help with any of the financial side? Because obviously stock is another form of cash, isn't it? So it's current assets. So it's
Yeah.
what cash gets turned into. How do you guys deal with that? And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. So Payoneer do have a solution, right? So we have a working capital solution for this very reason. Payoneer is ultimately servicing like over 5 million clients currently with active accounts and different resources that we have. Which has really meant that being a large proportion with being e-commerce, we've had to keep up with the demands of our clients, and that's allowed us to open up new offerings in working capital. What's working capital? Well, as we know, we're discussing, it's when you're an Amazon or a Walmart seller, in our example of using working capital, it's really important not to run out of cash, because cash is king, of course. And one of the main reasons that someone will need more cash is because they're launching a new product, they're launching in new markets, they want to prepare for peak season. So actually looking at upping their inventory count for, let's say, Q4 as an example. So Payoneer have got a great solution, which is our working capital offer. And what that does is that if you're a customer of ours, and that we have you connected, your store is connected to Payoneer, and through to Amazon or Walmart, then what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to give you an advance on your marketplace receivables. So let's say, Michael, you're selling on Amazon UK, and you are doing 100k a month, which would be great. Then we would be able to offer up to 150% of the cash that you're expected to receive as an advance. Okay, so if you're hitting, like, let's say July, between July and October time and you're thinking, right, okay, it's going to take a couple of months for my stock to come in for Q4, sales are going to shoot up. I think it's like 65% of sales occur on Q4 on average for the average Amazon seller, which is incredible. So we're going to get more stock in. We're going to have much more aggressive ad campaigns. We're going to have, a huge amount more, resource that's going to have to be pumped into that successful Q4. So that's a great use case of why someone would want a working capital offer from Payoneer. And in terms of like the repayment methods, it's very in line with Amazon. So we only take a fixed fee, which is very small, we actually recover the payment that was issued as you get paid from Amazon. So on those bi-weekly disbursements. So it's a great way to be able to actually have that boost of cash when you need it.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing you got to think through, and I think that everyone's very wary of loans, and so they should be, because it does increase risk to a degree. But as you said, I think that the main phrase is that cash is king. So running out of cash is the thing that everyone should be really afraid of, followed by unwise loans. But it's got to be for a proven product, and I definitely would, when I occasionally get sort of people who haven't got a proven product wanting to borrow a lot of money to launch, I just say don't do it. But if you've got a proven product, I think some kind of judicious use of funding, whether it's equity or in this case sort of similar to I don't know if it's technically a debt. Is it sort of receivables purchase or something like that? The working capital loan is that sort of technically roughly what it is?
Yeah, so it's not technically a loan. It's an advance on the receivables. So
Yeah,
so it's different in terms of like how it's structured.
yeah,
But the benefit of like us being issuing the advance rather than going to the bank or something, it's like it's instant. It's
hmm
based on your receivables. That there's so many additional advantages of the speed and how you pay it back, and of course that the fee is fixed as well. Makes it much more attractive.
yeah. What I would say is different between that and a loan is very simple, which is a receivables based repayment means that if you sell less, you pay less back, which is kind of obvious. But if you have a loan that's say 60-month fixed loan or 5 years, every single month you've got to pay them back no matter what your income is. And if you have a bad month, like you overspend on your PPC, or your products all have to be ordered in one go, then that can be a real challenge. So I think that's a very important thing to say, that if you're going to borrow any money, or in this case not exactly borrow but get money you can use, think about the repayment schedule, and receivables, or purchase or an advance on receivables, or whatever you call it, is much safer, I think. So that's worth thinking through. That may not be the only source of funding you need as well, of course. That's a bit wider scope than this podcast. So then let's talk about obviously the thing that's at the core of what Payoneer does, which is international payments. What are the challenges here, and what do we need to have in place?
Yeah, so coming back to that sort of expansion piece, we've gone through the sort of typical journey of things that you need to consider. I suppose a really important one is as you say, where Payoneer come into its own. So the actual currency that you're going to be receiving your funds in. So it's really important that everyone understands that sales on Amazon, as soon as you come out of your home country, you're going to be most likely, in most cases, going to be paid in different currencies. Okay, so if you're a US based business being paid in USD from Amazon, well, if you expand your business to the UK or Europe, you're going to be open to different currencies such as GBP and Euro in this example. So one of the main use cases as to why an e-commerce seller would actually use Payoneer is because Payoneer allows businesses to open like free virtual bank accounts. So what we call multi-currency accounts. So you've got to think of your own bank account, let's say it's HSBC, Nationwide, whoever it might be, in the same way as you do to Payoneer, but for your business in a certain respect. And what it does is that once you actually create an account, you'll be then issued with a Euro account, a USD account, GBP account, and all of the other local receiving accounts in line with sort of the likes of Amazon storefronts, web stores, however you want to call them. And the advantage of that is that, as you start to expand into, let's say, Europe, for the sake of the podcast today, you're going to be paid by Amazon in euros. Unless you obviously attach your bank account of where you're currently based, or your home bank account that you use, which of course will be in a different currency. So in this example, if I just very quickly go through sort of what the typical flow is, if you are a US based business, so you have a USD bank account and you are selling in Europe, Amazon.de.fr, and you are making those sales on a bi-weekly basis. If you connect your USD bank account into your European Seller Central, then Amazon will use their Amazon currency conversion services to bring those funds, so that euro amount, into dollars for you. Okay. And they'll also add around a 2% premium as an admin charge. Okay. A lot of businesses that I've worked with of all sizes aren't aware that that's actually the case. And this obviously then comes on to like them receiving their funds in euros, being converted into USD, and then they need to pay a contractor, or maybe their supplier is based in Europe, so they then need to make another conversion from their bank account over to euro. So they're actually open to double conversion charges. So the way that Payoneer comes in here is that you open a free Payoneer account. You have all of these different accounts that you have access to, so you can receive your funds. And really, it's as simple as changing your bank information from, in this example, from your USD account and changing it to your Payoneer Euro account. Because then the disbursements from the likes of Amazon is euro to euro. You can then use your Payoneer bank account as a 360 view on all of your incoming and outgoing payments, as a 360 guide on where you're at as a business. You can pay your suppliers, you can pay your VAT, all with these various balances that you have in different currencies. And then, of course, you can then withdraw to bank, which will be much, much cheaper using someone like Payoneer than it would be to use your bank for a lot of these international wire transfers and and various payments. Okay, so Payoneer do actually build in a small margin of that, much smaller than the likes of Amazon and your bank, and that's based on a sliding scale based on your volume of payments that we would expect to see.
Yeah, as I guess an example of the fact that a specialist like yourselves will compete more keenly and is more efficient than a behemoth like Amazon that does everything. And yes, Amazon's at least 2% premium, I think, and not necessarily the best rates either. So you hit twice, aren't you? Because the 2% is actually, if you're selling 100,000, if you're receiving 100,000 euros a month or something, that's going to be $2,000 a month, or that really adds up. But also, the thing I would say is people often think, 2%, that's too small to fiddle with. But that may be 2% of your payout, but that's not 2% of your profit. That might be 10%, 15, even 20% of your profit. You really need to do your sums and think this clearly, because that's money that you were going to have that you've just given away to somebody else for no particularly good reason, because Payoneer will sort you out. So I have to say that also, if you are based in the UK, to flip another example, as I've done many years with using Payoneer, indeed, that if my suppliers are in China, which they mostly have been, and I'm getting paid in the US in US dollars, then I can completely bypass all the currency fluctuations between the dollar and the pound, which have been quite considerable, particularly around the sort of Brexit era. It went from anywhere from $1.70 to the low about $1.10. It's actually big, and I bypassed all that, and I haven't had to convert currency. I just got paid in US dollars by my customers, paid my suppliers in US dollars, and it just simplified things. Actually, weirdly enough, that's been my experience. Talking of currency fluctuations, how do we, what effect does that have, and how does Payoneer help with that?
Yeah, so I would say that the main benefit, as you've listed, of using someone like Payoneer is that obviously, um, unlike some other payment providers, you can obviously keep the balances in your account. So as you get paid in USD, you can keep your USD funds in your USD bank account, and then you can go and pay out to the likes of your suppliers or sales tax, whatever it might be. So I think it's really, being aware of the fluctuations and playing to your advantage, that you have the ability to keep funds in various accounts. But when you need the funds, you can still make the transfer, manage your currencies within your Payoneer platform to allow you to then go and, pay yourself or pay your freelancers, or so to say. So I think it's definitely something that you really need to be aware of and stay on top of. But I think that the main aspect of how Payoneer assists is that, if you've got a lot of different streams of revenue coming in, whatever currency it's in, it's important that that you can keep that on account until you want to move it around as and when you please as a business.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to get your head around. That sort of currency just seems like some silly game that people play. Like, I think some people see I think Anglo-Saxons generally, like, Americans and Brits, both a bit guilty of seeing the world as a place that everyone speaks English really, but they do this gobbledygook thing called their language for some real reason. And actually, that's not really how it is. They actually live in a different way, and currencies have to be thought of as not just money, but they have their life of their own. And really, my experience is you want to keep them separate from each other as much as you can. When you cross that kind of currency barrier, there's always a cost of some description, isn't there? So I
Yeah.
find that the ability to sort of live in US dollars or live in euros or whatever as much as possible and only change what I have to for my own personal consumption has been a real efficiency. And the other thing to say is if you're thinking, oh, 2% doesn't sound much, but if you add 2% here and you save 2% there and you save 2% there, then you could double your profits by simply running a more efficient operation. And not only is that going to make you personally more money if you're the business owner, but it makes your business way more sellable, I would say as well. And that's not a small thing. If you've got an efficiently set up system, then that means number one, the business makes more profit, which makes it a lot more valuable. And number two, whoever's buying it is not going to have to set that up. So you could create a more attractive package there. Well, interesting trip through the a sort of overview. I think it's quite good to do little overview episodes like this sometimes. We've had a lot of people deep diving on tax and what have you, but it's quite good to, think through what you're going to need to do, and you're going to have a list of service providers that are experts, and obviously Payoneer are experts, as you've outlined already, in the whole international payments arena. So just quickly outline for us what services Payoneer provides for e-commerce sellers, particularly their Amazon focused.
Yeah, so obviously you mentioned the local receiving accounts. So really receiving those disbursements from the likes of Amazon into a local account as opposed to receiving them into your home bank account, which may be different. So that's definitely the key resource there. You're then able to like manage your currencies. So as we've just discussed, if you've got a euro balance and you need it to pay a supplier in USD, then you can then manage your currencies effectively at low exchange rates. And then obviously make payments out of your Payoneer account as you would be able to in your bank account, your personal bank account. So that's definitely the main reason as to why we have the amount of active customers that we do, which is continuing to grow. We've also discussed working capital, so needing an advance. So remember that you might not be there now, but you could be very soon, and that applies to launching new products, preparing for key or peak seasons, and really just to bear in mind as a business that resources is everything, especially when you're looking to try and aggressively grow, whether that's for advertising, stock, whatever it might be. So yeah, working capital being a really key player in a lot of businesses' growth. And then we also have our commercial card as well. So we also offer a MasterCard, which allows businesses to make purchases through the card in various currencies again. You can have a physical or virtual card with Payoneer. And we also offer like a cashback incentive as well. So a lot of sellers that are spending heavily, whether it's like inventory, for example, or more commonly ad spend. It's really important that like if you're spending a lot of money on like Facebook and Google ads as an example, then why not get a cashback, albeit maybe small, but it's always good to have money back in your pocket. And again, like this whole 360 outlook on your ins and outs of every marketplace, every sale, every for reconciliation purposes, it's much better just to have an all-in-one platform and don't rely on like just your home bank account to be able to do it all, because the fees are going to be higher, the reconciliation isn't going to be as strong, and also like Payoneer has been designed for businesses like yours, for Amazon sellers. So use the tools. It's free to set up. And there's only one way that Payoneer is going, and that's to make your life easier and to extend the suite of services that we offer.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the end, what you're using is a tool designed for a specific purpose, whereas banks kind of do everything. But that, in my experience, they pretty much do everything somewhat bureaucratically, let's put it politely. The number of banks that I've talked to where they are mystified by the idea of international currencies is amazing to me. I mean, general high street banks in the UK. The UK is a pretty international and connected economy. It's unlike America, where the banking system seems to be stuck in about 1970. So if you're listening in America, you really need Payoneer, because my experience of American banks, I like literally, I should have framed it on the wall, but I once got paid by somebody from America for some deal that I completely forgotten about, and they sent me a check in US dollars, which was very sweet. I have no way of cashing that. So if your bank is sending dollars to people in through actual physical checks, then my friends, you need Payoneer, and that's a bit extreme, but it made me laugh. So yeah, Payoneer, I've had to say, has been, in my experience, a very helpful tool indeed for me personally, and for my clients who've used it as well, and very trusted, as you say, by lots of people. So if people want to check it out, then go to amazingfba.com/Payoneer, and you can check out what services people have to offer there, and the receiving accounts, working capital, and the commercial card, all very helpful things. Tom, last question for you. Is there any question that I should have asked you in regard to international expansion that you think sellers should know about?
Cool. You put me on the spot here. I think obviously there's a huge piece around the advertising and really getting to grips with your customers. I'd say the last piece of consideration or advice I would give is, before you really dive into a market, make sure that your audience is correct, and make sure that your translations based on like your listings and your keywords are all done in the localized language. So make sure that that you bear that in mind, especially when expanding. Like from the US, you say jersey, we say jumper as an example. So really getting to grips with that terminology, yeah, using other providers to, one, give you the advice that you need to expand, and the expertise, and just use that, because 99% of the time it's free, even if it's for half an hour or an hour. Use them. And also, there's a lot of tools out there, in partnerships, which is of course the area I'm in. I speak to hundreds of businesses within the ecosystem, and it's incredible of the additional growth that sellers see just by relieving some of the pressure on certain aspects, inventory management being one. And lean on those people and those softwares to make your life easier. So that's it from me. But yeah.
That's a very good advice. Yeah, so make sure your translations are localized. Definitely agree with that. And above all, it's not just a question of translating words like jersey to jumper in the UK and the US. If you're selling, car accessories, it's a nightmare, isn't it? Boot, hood. We've got lots of different words just to trip Americans up here. But also, if you're selling to the Japanese or the Germans, there are cultural considerations in Japan. If you're selling clothing, you need to think about not exposing too much flesh in, selling underwear or anything like that. And if you're selling to Germans, you don't want to be screaming about benefits all day, because they're a feature-centric nation of engineers. So those are just a couple of hints there. So you're absolutely right. You've got to get to grips with that. And the final thing you said, which really brings us back to Payoneer, is using experts and getting free advice, because you often can get free advice from people. So um, as you say, if somebody, it becomes a who, not how question, right? Some people often say to me, how do I import stuff from China to USA? And I say, don't. Find the person who can do it for you. And same with Payoneer. Instead of trying to do complicated things with your bank, get in a Payoneer account and just follow the system that you've set up. So Tom, just remains for me to say many thanks for coming live on the show. Been a lot of fun to talk through. And in 2022, if you're still in New Year's resolution mode, then it could be the year where you expand international. And if so, Payoneer could be an excellent partner for you. Tom, many thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Right then, that's the podcast recorded, folks. As I said before, if you are listening live, don't forget to, or on the replay indeed, on the videos, don't forget to type in your comments and questions, and I'll make sure that Tom gets access to those. If we need to answer any questions, or I'll chime in myself, give my 2 pence or 4 cents, as they might say. Tom, thanks very much for coming on. It's been an interesting trip through the whole process. Very helpful.
Thanks very much for having me.